Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you'll see a little link down below, and you can click on that, and you'll end up in Zoom. There, you'll see another link, and you can end up in Mukana, and that's where you become a producer for the show. Your questions and your comments and your votes will decide what we talk about. This is the whole show. It's just questions. First hour is just general questions, things that you might be interested in around virtual production or media production. Second hour is something we want to spend a little more time on this week. Today, we're going to talk about Luma Keying in the ATEM and why it's important. Tomorrow, we're going to have Darren Okada, who's former president of the American Society for Cinematographers and a prolific cinematographer. And it's going to be really exciting to have him here. So Darren's going to join us tomorrow to talk about cinematography. On Friday, we're going to talk about streaming to YouTube, just strategies and process and the tech related to that. So stay tuned for that. And of course, that's on Friday. And then on Saturday, we have education, 2 hours. Emily Russo hosts that. And that is a talk amongst teachers. It's a really good conversation, not streamed. So you'll need to be in Zoom to see that. All right, Bill, let's go ahead and take it away.
Good morning, Alex. And absolutely. The first question comes from Jason. It looks like Kerala in Miami, Florida. And he says, would you please describe the MicCheck tool? Is it available for download use and any advice on configuring? Not sure what he means by the MicCheck. I
think he's talking about the Office Hours MicCheck here. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it's a plug-in WLM waves. You could use something like OBS to insert it into. How we have it running is we use OBS to kick it out into a virtual camera, and then we bring it in as another entity here into the meeting. Mickey usually handles it. I think it's TJ, but I think it's about $30 normally on sale. Put a link in the chat to the plugin, but you need a host. It's a VST, so you need something to run it. For cheap, by the end of the month, Jonas and I will have one where you can pull it up and it'll give you a MicCheck similar to Ulean's. It looks like this. So it'll be Ulean is a free one if you don't want to pay for WLM. This is what Ulean looks like. And if you go to meetingmeters.com in about 2 weeks, we'll have it up to where you can do MicChecks that way.
That's great. All right, cool, Chris. Nope, you muted yourself, Chris.
I was just going to plug Meeting Meters for Guy if he was going to be shy and not plug it for himself.
And what's the URL for Meeting Meters again?
It's meetingmeters.com. So right now it's just in beta, but it runs on a Zoom room. This is the only way we could get it to do what's called an auto answer. So it comes into your meeting as an attendee. So you enter in your meeting ID. Jonas provided an API or CLI. I can't remember which one that puts the call into the Zoom room, calls it up. It comes into your meeting, and then you get what you see here, which is the WLM meters or Ulean meters, and it's pretty cool. It's taken a long time. I mean, I had to get an enterprise account. It's taken a lot longer than we would ever thought because we're using auto scaling. It's all hosted on AWS. It's pretty complicated stuff. And thanks, Jim, on the panel for helping Jonas with the auto scaling.
I think that I think a lot of things that we get done in the world are because we thought that they'd be easy when they started, and then we're stuck with it. I mean, like this looks easy, and then there's so many things I've done even recently where I'm like, oh yeah, we'll be able to do that, and then you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die, but there's a deadline, and so you just deadlines and optimism can get you a long way. All right, next question.
You suddenly understand why not everybody has those tools.
Yeah.
Douglas Carmichael is up next. Would there be any benefit to adding an ATEM Mini to my system when I will not be starting with a single?
When I will only be starting.
Well, I'll only be starting with a single camera. The main recording streaming software I use is Mimo Live.
Go ahead, Rupert.
I think there's all kinds of advantages. You can bring in other HDMI sources, so maybe a computer to do your screen sharing. You could use a playout device like Playout B to do some playout. Gives you a quick way to fade to black, which is really useful. It gives you some keying options. You get to experiment with that. So hang on for the second hour today on that. And you can have multi-view also.
Yeah, and Rupert, it doesn't sound like you're coming in on that mic. It sounds like you might have switched over to your internal. Go ahead, Ken.
Rupert covered most of the points, but we're all ATM drug pushers here, so yeah, that won't be your first or your last.
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I happen to use an ATEM with Mimo Live, and it allows me to do some rather rapid, changing of logos and lower thirds. That because the ATEM, of course, has got some limitations on its storage, whereas Mimo Live does not. So I'm just using a Luma key off of in through the ATEM, bring the second computer in.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
It fades. You can do fades in, fades out to black, and then of course it modularizes from your computer, so it keeps your computer from starting to spin up fan-wise. Because then you can also take that ATEM and move it off into the corner, so that fan doesn't spin up like it normally it does do anyway. So, and then of course you can use like a Stream Deck to control that as well. And once again, the modularization, if something happens with the computer, at least some of your system is still up, and you can also stream out from it. Rupert?
Yeah, it also gives you the option to experiment with a streaming bridge if that fits into your workflow.
Yeah. And the main thing is that when it's the beginning of an ecosystem, like if you get an ATEM, if you get a Blackmagic camera, now that's when things really jump up, because now you can shade the camera and make color changes and focus changes without actually having to go manually handle it. And any of us who have had their own camera who have to try to get your focus right is a thing. Go ahead, Peter, real quick.
Just be careful, because he explicitly called out ATEM Mini. So there are certain things that are not there on, that's the entry level box, right? That doesn't have streaming. It doesn't have a bunch of stuff to go with it.
Well, it depends, yeah. ATEM Mini is the entire line, but yeah, if it's just a Mini without that, yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle here on the panel asks, what's the good way to get into spatial audio?
First thing to do, I would say, is to listen. Listen to a lot of spatial audio. Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So Logic has surround built in right now, so you can do 5.1, 7.1. Wait until later on in the year when hopefully they roll in Atmos to that feature set. It can very easily, so you actually only need like stereo output from your, in theory. You just need a couple of devices that can do stereo out, and in the settings, this is a question that's coming up later on, in the settings you can make, you can bring 3 devices as one and tell all 3 to take, left, right. This is a question coming up later on, so I'll answer this a bit later on how to do it. But Logic is a good place to start, and then when Atmos gets rolled into Logic, probably later on in the year, then you'll be able to do some object-oriented stuff as well.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, in terms of listening, I'd look up for spatial audio immersive venues. They're popping up all over the place, and you go and get a first-hand, real-world experience of a real big system.
Mm-hmm. There you go, Bill.
Well, I also think it's probably useful to just talk about what the word means, because I think there's a lot of people who do not do what we do all the time who may be a little confused by that. And it's kind of All Sound started off as mono, and then they went to stereo, gave you a little better sound stage. Quad or surround became another thing, but now spatial adds a whole nother geometrical ability to position sound sources or instruments in all sorts of space. And the newest systems are taking advantage of this to make stunning content.
Yeah, the main thing is I always think of stereo as kind of inside your head and spatial is outside of your head. So it feels much more around you. The other thing is because you're able to place objects or place stuff even in the beds in the 5.1 and so on and so forth, you get more clarity of instruments. You can hear the instruments a lot more. When you get used to listening to spatial, one thing you'll notice is that stereo feels a little muddy. It's just like this money because everything's kind of get mushed together, and spatial's going to let you put things in very specific places. One of the things I'm working on is putting together a playlist from the Apple playlists, because Apple has that's the best thing to do is go to the Apple Spatial, and I would definitely listen to the intro. You probably already have, Guy, but the intro to Spatial that they do with Marvin Gaye specifically is really strong as far as figuring out how to like understanding what it does. And then once you start to tune your ear, that's the very first thing. Then, as it said, Carl talks about Logic. There's some other plugins that you can get as well. I think that actually Blackmagic has Resolve training this week that includes Atmos. So something to keep your eye on as well. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, as you did mention, a good way, as Alex said, is to listen. And the best way to listen to them is Apple Music and through the Apple Pro Max headphones is a really you know, there are other ways of doing it, and there are other headphones. But
For music, the Apple Max and the Pro, when you're watching a movie, are going to be directional. When you turn your head, they know that you're turning your head. For music, any headphone will work. So any headphones will work for music itself. It's just a matter of, for spatial audio for movies, it's a little disconcerting in some cases. I was looking at something, I was watching something last night, and you turn like this and you're like, oh no, the audio is on the wrong side, but it's actually paying attention to it. And I put my headphones on backwards, like I was in a rush, and then it was really weird because as I turned this way, the audio went the other way, and so it was it's an odd experience. Go ahead, Leland.
I knew that was coming. If you're involved more with a PC than you are Apple, perhaps, is the fact that Windows does have spatial audio built into the Windows 10 system, and you can access that by right-clicking the speaker down at the bottom of your taskbar to the right. Under that, you'll see the access points for various activities. You can either get the apps through Windows App Store, or you can go ahead and go as deep as the Dolby access. And DTS is another thing that's coming out through NVIDIA that can also be considered when it comes to spatial audio.
Yeah, we're going to probably talk about spatial audio at least once a month, starting in August. So there'll be one of the audio days every time will be spatial audio, so that we can start to ramp up. We think that all the record companies right now are updating everything into spatial, because it's a kind of a gold rush at the moment, because Apple made it available in music, and so we should see. It should see a big bump for quite some time. Next question.
James Hutcherson comes to us next from Dublin, Ireland. And James says, I have the opportunity to pick up a Heil PR40 for a nearly 50% discount. I don't really need it. I don't have a preamp to feed it into. Should I buy it now for the future? And what would be the least expensive preamp to match it with?
Go ahead, Carl.
So with the Heil, you need a bit of gain. So the one I'd always suggest is a Mic 500 USB. Don't worry about the tube and the settings. You can just set it to the standard settings. But what it has is it's got a gain and a volume up. So this will easily be able to use nearly any dynamic microphone that's like 60 dB.
And that's an interface as well. That's a USB interface.
It's USB. There's a 300 version which doesn't have the USB, which is like $10 cheaper, and the 500 version has the USB. This is a pretty handy little piece of kit.
Is that new?
No. The 300 is new. The non-USB version is new. The USB version's been out for a couple of years.
All right, Jeffrey.
I think you should buy it, and I think you should send it to me, and I'll take care of it.
Yeah, at half off, it's a really, really good deal. I would definitely get it. Next question.
Paul Wallace is up next from the panel here from Austin, Texas. He says, ViewMagic has developed hardware and software that lets video callers look each other in the eye and 3D for video calls. Comments, and he wonders if it'll take off.
Is this stuff that is basically remapping your eyes? I mean, is that? I guess that's the question that I have. Is I mean, the examples that they put on their website is not super compelling. So I don't know. I think they'd have to probably put. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'm not. I don't know what I'm looking at. Yeah, maybe for some folks. Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
So not for this, but I just got done playing a couple days ago the TikTok. There's actually a TikTok app that allows you to put it on a picture, and then of course it'll move the eyes. And I was putting it on me to see how that would work, and I was blinking, moved my eyes around, and it just stayed in a fixed position. So I could see this happening in many different AI ability. Easy. It
just has to be seamless. Like it has to be absolutely positively seamless and not look weird. All of that stuff makes you, I mean, again, I'll just always come back to basic ball handling skills. Like just that just having a good setup that you can do this with is always going to be better than some kind of trick. Next question.
Moving on to Rupert McPray here in the panel from Dallas, Texas. And Rupert says a UK fiber broadband provider is working with Nokia to provide 10 gigabits per second broadband to 100,000 customers by the end of 2022. Ookla also recently ranked Singapore #1 for global speed tests. Why are certain countries so far ahead of the curve?
Good, Carl.
So Ookla takes an average. Singapore's tiny, so it's point-to-point nodes. So how many switches it has to go through puts in latency. So Singapore wins a lot of these kind of tests because they're so small and they have infrastructure that's modern. South Korea also wins a lot of these tests because of their size as well. But you find places like the United States, Canada, Russia, Australia, they're so large, they're not going to do it because they have to go through the distances are so great and there's so many nodes and so many switches, it slows down the internet measurably when you measure it.
10 gigabits, that's a problem in the United States in large areas. The biggest reason we don't have good bandwidth is we don't get into politics here, but it's politics. Let's be clear. Like it's oligarchies that are paying our representatives to stay out of their way. I mean, we just need to call a spade a spade. All right. That's why we don't have good bandwidth, though. That's why we can't have good things. All right. Next question.
Adrian Allback of Brisbane, Australia is up next. And he says, I'm looking for recommendations on an I/O to mix and monitor 5.1 stems from Logic Pro, please. And he's got an iMac 2021 for his hardware.
Go ahead, Carl.
All right, so this is where it's all actually built into Logic and into audio MIDI setup. It's all built into, you don't need anything. The only hardware you need is audio interface that collectively, so audio interfaces, plural, that collectively have 6 outputs. So you can have 3 stereo audio interfaces in audio MIDI setup. You can aggregate them into one, and then I'm going to put links into reply to this question in Meccana because there is 2 steps you need to follow. So rather than me explain the whole thing, but in that software, in audio MIDI setup, you'll set up which aggregate you're going to aggregate your outputs for 3 interfaces, or one interface if you've got an 8-channel output. That'll do it on one, of course, but you don't need that. And then in Logic, you'll map. I'll also put a link for this. You'll map the aggregate outputs to left, right, center, surround left, surround right, and sub. So it's all built in. You don't need to buy anything extra. Hopefully, you've got enough audio interfaces units that you can just aggregate and get 6 channels out through 3 units.
Next question.
I'm sourcing Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas is asking, has anyone experience with using MPLS, multi-protocol label switching, VPNs, in production workflows?
Yeah, have. You don't really call them VPNs at that point because they're really your own network. Like you're basically an MPLS. You're dedicating a network between disparate locations. Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, exactly right. So an MPLS is not necessarily a virtual private network. It's a private network that's delivered to you by a provider, usually across multiple sites to bring them together. So it's just inherently a private network. And the multi-protocol type, by definition, multi-protocol label switching, it allows you to put in and feed in different types of network, not necessarily only IP and Ethernet, but you can put other protocols down there too, and they just pop out at your other locations, spread out, separated as you put them in at the other end.
And in the places we've used them, they're pretty profound. When you get it working, it's much different than a VPN or even fast internet. You're talking about being able, you're transferring files. There's a little bit more latency from LA to New York or whatever, or LA to San Francisco. But in a large scale piece, you might even be using drives that are somewhere else and copying things, moving things. We've even written files across the network, so we can literally capture in LA from San Francisco. So it's a entire, and that's like Apple ProRes. So it's an entirely different level of service. And there are definitely not a lot of people need them, but when you need them, they're very useful. Next question
comes to us from Nick Pavlinek of Southeast Michigan. And he says, Alex, based on your MacBreak pick yesterday, Oculus Quest, what's a sub $500 camera, memory card kit at all that you would suggest for trail riding?
So I assume what you're talking about is the, I was talking about the Quest yesterday, so I'm assuming you're talking about a 360 camera. One of the better ones that, and I don't know if they still make it, the one that is really with the software that's pretty slick is actually the GoPro. It has a lot of stabilization. So one of the things you want to think about is how you're going to stabilize those images, and the software that comes with it will stabilize it for you at a fairly high resolution. So you can get if you're doing it on trail rides and so on and so forth, there's a lot of movement. The one thing that it won't necessarily fix is the it'll fix the rotational data, but you have to remember that your horse is, I grew up riding horses. Your horse is inherently moving up and down as well. so you just the nature of it. So there'll be some movement, there that is a little, that's a little different there. So you may want to think about some kind of vertical stabilization, that will keep it, that will tend to shock that area there. So the ones that I use the most, to be honest, and these are, I think, less expensive. I'm not sure what I bought the GoPro a long time ago. Some of the best ones for small under 500 are the smaller Thetas. The Theta is probably the most fun, as far as that goes. I don't know if it would do great in a trail ride. It would do great when you stop and take a picture. And I will, and as you get more expensive, I think the Thetas go all the way up to $1,000 and all the way down to a couple hundred. The resolution, frame rate, ability to live stream in 4K, spherical, there's a lot of options. I think Rico's done a great job, and there's some great tools because they have an open API. So one of the other cool things for those listening is the Thetas. You can have external software that will fire off multiple exposures, and so you can build basically an HDR globe of the location with a couple, with a. Yeah, there you go. There's one of them right there. And great little cameras. Next question.
Nick, I'm sorry, that's Nick's over. And Brian Becker of Charlottesville, Virginia says, any tips for screen capturing high quality text out of Keynote? I'm seeing a lot of aliasing with text of all sizes when I screen scrape from a Keynote presentation. I've tried NDI scanner, OBS, and HDMI out into Mimo Live, all with similar results.
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so if you're trying to do a virtual camera from Keynote, I've heard that's a problem. You may want to try hardware, even if you're using like a micro recorder from Blackmagic, which is about $70, $80 US. So iOS device. So an iOS device at 1080 will give you really, well, that's what I'm using here. And it gives you really nice, but yeah, you will want to add a little piece of hardware there to get your HDMI back into your computer. Because I've heard that a lot of virtual cameras just do these weird aliasing for scaling reasons.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Once you do the capture, a screen capture, you're fixing that type into whatever it looks like on the screen and blowing it up from there. If it's a bitmapped image, will always get jaggier and worse looking. Most fonts, PostScript fonts and things like that are resolution independent. And as you blow up the font, the letters stay clear. That just doesn't happen with screen caps. So the rule of thumb is to make it as big as you can possibly manage before you do a screen capture, because it's never going to get any better than that.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, just a note on the scaling. Just check that the display you're trying to capture on is the same resolution as the one you're trying to play back on, because some of these computer displays aren't necessarily 1920 by 1080.
And make sure that your screen capture is truly capturing that resolution. A lot of them, to save space, will actually internally capture at 960 by 540. Then and on an image you won't notice it. On text you do. So that's the other thing to look at, is whether they're internally capturing at the right resolution. Because you'll sometimes find that in the preferences, you'll see this kind of resolution option. I'm not sure what you're capturing with. Go ahead, Guy. Yes.
Sorry, I had to jump over to have a KVM, and I was going over to my Mac to make sure that you can do this. It's in the general appearance. There is something called turn on text smoothing for font sizes in a pop-up menu. So you just got to go into your system preferences, click appearance, and then go to font smoothing and use LCD font smoothing when available. See if that helps with the raster aliasing.
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, the other thing is you mentioned Mimo Live. I mean, the screen capture function in Mimo Live will do scaling as it's capturing if you tell it what size you want to scale it to. Right, and that's in the program, the definition of what the program is for the event. Right, you tell it what you're sending out, what you're either recording or sending out as. So mine are typically set to 1080p, but you can set them as high as 4K, and it will rescale whatever it's capturing into that image size.
The question is, though, well, it's going to capture it at what it captures at, and then it's going to scale them up. So that's not necessarily.
Yeah, but it actually, I've tried it. It actually does a pretty good job. Now, granted, I tend to do what Guy and company said. I have a second 4K display, which I'm capturing the from. The other one is just to make sure, and I know this is almost a second hour topic, you know, you can play some games in terms of using the, you know, a non-existent background on and chroma key it, and it will come out clearer when you're recording it as well.
And Guy, where is that appearance again? What is it under?
It says that it's under system preferences, appearance.
There's no, I just don't see appearance. That's why I was wondering. I don't see an appearance, a system preference.
Just type in the search box, type appearance in the top right.
Oh, it's in general, inside of general. That's why.
Yeah, general, and then appearance.
I still don't see it. Anyway, all right, next question.
Moving on, Gabriel Ung in Malaysia is up next, and he says, in live production, is it more important for network balancing or network bonding?
Yeah, go ahead, Rupert.
So the distinction between the two, first of all, is balancing will distribute your internet access over multiple connections. It won't ever send the same connection over two, but it might put your certain connectivity one way and your different type of access another, but it won't bond the same stream to two places. Bonding does do that, but then you are dependent on both working potentially. If you need that bandwidth, what's probably most important is redundancy.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how much bandwidth you have, and also if you're doing any kind of real-time communication. So if you're using Zoom, bonding does not work very well. So what you want to do is balance out everything else, put it all on some other connection, and then let your Zoom connection take over the core area. So if you're using Zoom, that'd be what you'd want to do. If you're doing a stream, if you're bonding, you just know that there has to be a piece of hardware somewhere. It can be in the cloud. I mean, there's some services that do it, but there has to be hardware somewhere that's going to catch it. So usually when we bond, we have a hardware appliance on the other side, and you're using that connection remotely. Next question.
Rupert McCrae, who was just answering that one, has this question from Dallas, Texas. Fox Sports announced this year's Major League Baseball All-Star Game will be broadcast in 4K HDR, but actually they're upconverting from SD-HDR. The game will also have immersive audio with 75 field mics and mics on the player. Is this a showcase or an experiment, he wonders?
Go ahead, Carl, and then Peter.
I'm guessing they're probably not going to go from SD-HDR up to 4K HDR, so it's probably more SDR. I'm guessing you'll got there, but that's not uncommon. So you can map, but the cameras themselves. See, this is the thing. So 709 is going to be the output. So the cameras themselves can be either at any point. So it depends where it is in the switcher. So you can actually make two pipelines. You can actually make an SDR and a HDR pipeline because the camera itself can be remapped either way.
Go ahead, Peter.
So I'm going to respond to the actual question that Rupert has, and the answer is probably yes to both.
Yeah,
it is both
exactly.
a showcase and an experiment. I mean, it really. I mean, they're gonna. This it's a no pun intended. It's a no harm, no foul game. They can't screw it up.
Yeah. I think that what they're probably doing is doing a Rec 709, and then they're going to expand that. Is if they have a 10-bit or 12-bit image. So if they're doing the Rec 709 with a high enough bit rate, they can stretch that out back. They can stretch it, especially if they're doing HLG. HLG is kind of SDR plus. Like it's just barely. They're barely moving the needle, but they can call it HDR. So that gets back to the showcase. It's also the easiest one to use, for a production. So my guess is that they're using HLG, and so they'll if they were using Vision, they'd say Vision, and they could turn Vision into that. The problem really is that in the 709 scale, if they're actually doing 709, that signal is going to originate as a linear. So it's a linear key, and I don't know if I have my keyer working. I had something. No, something else popped up. So there's a linear key that and the problem with that is that the reason we use log is because there's a knee at the very top that captures a lot more data, so that you can get clouds and bright areas and everything else, and then we can stretch that out later and really bring it into properly and with all the detail. When you have a linear 709. There's going to be a lot less data there. And so the result is that, it'll be more likely to clip. So you can make it brighter, but you can make some 709 brighter. What you can't do is make it have more detail in those brighter areas. You're still limited to the 709 space. So that's the real challenge is that they're probably not going to shoot the All-Star Game. Now they might. If they did that, that would be great. Like if they actually did 709 in log, which they could. I mean, that's just a transfer. They could then convert it to 709 on the way out and convert it to HDR. But I'd be really surprised if they go down that path, because while they can't screw it up, it's still a lot of people watching. They can't just experiment with all of them. But that's like a second pipeline. So it'd be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what they do. Next question.
Gabriel Ung is back from Malaysia, and this time he says most network bonding solutions in the market stream directly to content distribution networks like Facebook and YouTube. What budget-friendly options are there available to maintain a stable connection to other platforms like Zoom and Meet?
Well, I think as we said before, the bonding isn't going to work for Zoom and Meet. Go ahead, Rupert.
I mean, just on the budget-friendly side of things, there's Speedify, and then on Doug Johnson's channel, he has a demo there of, I think, a similar service, but you're down to the same.
Gabriel's
issues.
in Malaysia, so I don't know if Speedify is available there. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
The only thing I can think of is if you had a third party in between Zoom, Meet, and then of course your bonding, maybe like some sort of switching unit that will allow to accept that. I know you could probably go to Restream or StreamYard, and we talked about that last week on how you can then switch it into Zoom or Meet from there.
Yeah. So you're not going to, with Zoom and Meet, with a synchronous video connection, there's not a lot of replacements for just good wired connection. Like there's not really, because all the things that we do to get a little bit more bandwidth to go to YouTube or Facebook require things that increase latency, and the latency breaks what we're doing here. So that's the real challenge. There's not a lot of options when you get into a synchronous conversation. Next question.
Comes to us from Andre Dalla in Berlin, and he wants to know, when doing a first site survey at a customer's house for a little streaming event, what tools do you bring, and what are the things you regard as specially, assuming you don't have a fancy LiDAR phone?
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, one of the first tests to really do is to do a speed test to check how fast their internet is. That's going to be the key to a successful job.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, and where their internet is, where the router is, whether you can get an internet cable. But even if you haven't got LiDAR, take a camera and take just a bunch of pictures for reference. Maybe even the camera that you're intending to use, and check out the framing and lighting and stuff like that. There's also apps you can get for your phone to simulate different focal length lens combinations and stuff that might help you with framing. If you want to take measurements, I take a laser measurer, so I can quickly measure the distance, the width, and of a room, and also laser levels if you want to check levels, because I kind of like that stuff.
Go ahead, Leland.
I second the laser tool. The camera phone is your primary benefit when it comes to sites. Also, Wi-Fi Analyzer is an app you can get for free or paid on the Google Store and the App Store. It's great for picking up the different bands of Wi-Fi that are available. You'll see which are the strongest, which are overlapping the ones you want to use, so that you can change the channels on your router if necessary.
You don't want to use that.
You don't want to use the ones that are already there.
You don't want to use any of the Wi-Fi. You just want to know where the router is and how long an Ethernet cable you need to do it. I mean, the other thing you want to know is where the circuits are. So you want to know where the circuits are and how many there are in the house. So knowing where the circuit breaker is and asking them, like, do they know what those are? And you can actually do a tracer. You actually plug it into the plug, and then you go to the other side, and you can go down the circuits and figure out, what is what. So those are things that are kind of useful when you're going into a room if you're going to bring a lot of lights. If you're doing just a couple LEDs, it won't matter, but something to keep in mind. Laser measure is important. Take pictures from the corners towards the center of every corner towards the center of the room. That's going to give you kind of a 360 from the outside, which is oftentimes a little easier to understand. You just want a lot of overlap as you go through that. Bill, real quick.
I'd say 150-foot old school measuring tape, because you're going to want to get to the Ethernet jack, and you're going to want to snake it through all the furniture and around all the corners and find out how long you actually need your Ethernet cable to be, and bring at least a little more than that.
Generally, I just bring 100 feet. I just want to know, is it
Big
over 100 or
sometimes.
under? Is it over 100 feet or under 100 feet? Oh, River takes 300. Yeah. Next question.
Okay, moving on to Tyler Roberts, and Tyler is in Chambersburg. And for an M1 12-inch iPad Pro, which iPad case is the best? Apple's, Logitech, or others to consider?
Go ahead, Bill.
I don't think there's one best one. What are you going to use it for? I have at least 3 cases for all my iPads. One when I'm using it in the field that has a hand strap on it, a lighter weight one that has a keyboard, and a super lightweight one that if I'm just on an airplane and I know I'm not going to be doing complicated things, I haven't found a single case that fits all of those criteria perfectly.
Go ahead, Rupert.
The first place I go for cases is OtterBox.
Go ahead, Ken.
He said the best case is the Apple one with the keyboard, because then that really turns it into from an iPad into a laptop.
I've used a lot of them, and the one that my current Pro sits in is the new whatever case, the high end keyboard case. It's just a tank. It's just amazing. I can't go back. Next question.
Keenan Campbell is up next, and Keenan says, this past weekend, I did a job for a large production company based in LA. They indicated that I was recommended by an office hours member. Just a word of thanks to whoever recommended me. This is just one of the many reasons why office hours is the best community. Congratulations, Keenan.
It's a lot of that goes around. So it's worth it. It's worth, the ways people are always wondering, how do you take advantage of that? Well, it's just serving the rest of the community. So serve it in the way that makes sense. It's asking good questions. It's being, adding to the conversation inside the chats in an appropriate way, being part of Discord and helping people with, answering people's questions. And then, if you feel like you're ready for it, being on the panel. That's the best way to meet other people is to be on the panel. And there is an enormous amount of work that moves between our members. So but it's a different kind of thing. It's not going to be something you can hand out cards for. And a lot of this, is, how I got my job at Lucasfilm was answering people's questions on online forums. It's super useful. Go ahead, Leland.
It works like this. Tucker, Jeff Keithley, I need your help. Talk to me October. If you want some work, let me know. We need to discuss.
There you go. Exactly. But we're all fixing problems. And the thing is that it really is all about, who you know. But, the way you know people is to do things with them. So especially the other thing to look at is when we do collaborative projects, when we have things that are just, we're trying to figure out as a group, we're going to have a lot of opportunities to do that in the fall. And, working with people lets you know what they're like. Do they show up on time? Are they appropriate? Are they detail oriented? Or, all those things. And so finding ways to do that in a low risk environment is pretty important, which is why we're going to keep on producing those opportunities. Next question.
Robert Shoji is up next from Los Angeles. What's the proper way to send a 422 HQ file to another physical location via the internet?
Carl.
Frame.io.
Go ahead, Bill.
Specifically, the transfer function in Frame.io, if you have access to a high-speed line, will saturate it, and that's the fastest way I've found for even large files to go back and forth. There's other services, but that's kind of the top of the heap.
As far as a relatively, I know it'll seem expensive when you look at it, but as far as a relatively inexpensive way to move large files, we haven't found anything better than Frame.io. The current project we're working on, for instance, everything just goes up there. It costs money, but it just makes it much simpler when everyone can post stuff and pull stuff. But yeah, the only trouble really when you're transferring things, like there's Aspera that is, more about, I can send you a link and you can download it. And then there's Media Shuttle, which is a higher end tool that is designed for these kinds of things. I'm mostly on the receiving end of those. So, but they don't have a lot of limits to them. Things like Box and Dropbox and everything else have like 50 gig and 30 gig and 100 gig limits per file. Box is really painful. And so you don't have that. You just can buy more with Frame.io relatively inexpensively. Next question.
Fred Eric Eckert of Bad Herrenam, Germany says, Telestrator app question. I want to reset the canvas of a Telestrator app with a single button click. It would make it much easier to start a new drawing after switching sources or slides. Any recommendations for a Mac OS solution?
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, Mimo Live will do that for you.
For the Telestrator?
Yep.
Does it have a Telestrator?
Yeah.
Okay.
It does.
I've never used the Telestrator in Mimo Live. Yeah. And so if you're using a regular drawing app, usually most drawing apps have a clear all button. and it's just a matter of mapping that button to something, that some kind of action, a shortcut or an action that says when I push this button, it clears it. And you can usually map like a Wacom tablet. You can map one of the buttons to whatever the clear function is in that as well. And that'll work out well. Next question.
Gary Harper in London, in the UK says, is it possible to remove the background of a video clip in Keynote using a similar technique you showed us recently with an image?
Go ahead, Carl.
Let's see if this works.
So the answer is yes. Now,
It
did you?
works.
So did you do that? You did that all in Keynote?
I did that the last 60 seconds when I saw the question. Yeah.
And
this
that's
is
so you're
Keynote.
just doing the transparent, the instant alpha on video.
That's right. So this is, made it a black background. The baby's nice and white, so it makes it a little bit easier. Dancing Baby from the 90s, if anyone remembers. But yeah, so this is just simply a black background. I've set it up as a Luma key, not a linear key. And it's not too bad. It actually works out not too bad.
But that's a linear key in
It's a Luma key.
a Luma key in
Luma key
Oh no, okay,
in
that's a Luma
Keynote.
key in Keynote.
Keynote.
Oh, but
this is Luma Keying Keynote playing out from my phone.
no, I understand. But I guess what I'm saying is you're keying it in the ATEM though.
It's being keyed in the ATEM. Yeah.
Right. So
keying.
I think the question was, can you key I don't think you can key the video. You can, yeah. So you're right. You can absolutely do that in the ATEM. I don't know whether the question was for, can you just do it to make it transparent in Keynote, or does it go into, can you key it in the ATEM? Go ahead, Bill.
The key to this is the background uniquely different from the content that you want up front? Because that says you can pick it if it's all green or if it's all black or if it's all one thing, it's pretty easy. If you have an actual regular moving video scene and you want to key something out, there you're in the realm of doing rotoscoping and frame by frame, because you don't have a consistent thing unless you can identify one of the two planes. There's some AI
Ken.
that'll do it, help, but it's still, you got to figure it out how to separate.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, there's a really good tool online called, the website is remove.bg. Great for images, and it does video as well.
Yeah.
It's free, so it's a good first try.
After Effects also has some background removal tools that are pretty slick. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next, and he says, could the same Luma Keying concept demonstrated on the ATEM be copied to other?
Okay, good. Yeah, go ahead. I think that's for the next. That's for the next
is that?
hour.
Oh, that's from
Yeah.
Luma Keying. Oh, well, we've got a couple of rogues to get in there. Okay, so first hour, here we go. What would you recommend as a first DSLR, ideally under $1,000 for body and lens, primarily for Zoom calls and streaming?
Go ahead, Carl.
If you actually want a DSLR with a mirror, then I would say probably the D850. That's what it's called in Australia. They give it another name, so it's a Canon D850 or 850D, sorry, here in Australia. If you into mirrorless, then look at what Courtney got, which was the M50 Mark II. That's an amazing camera. It's $600, I believe, with a body only, maybe $700 US with the kit lens, so well under $1,000. But yeah, I'd be looking at the 800 or 850 in the Canon. You could go up to a 90, but I think that's going to push you over $1,000 US.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, the Canons with the webcam ability, you can do the TI series, and those can get under $500 right there. And then with a good lens, you'll be able to use for Zoom.
Next question.
Chris Taylor in Winter Park, Florida says, during last night's All-Star Game, when a player walked in front of the green screen behind home plate, a thick outline visually separated the player from the screen. How was the outline generated?
Oh, so it's a I'm trying to look for because they're keying in. Yeah, they're keying that graphic into it, and he's walking in front of it, so he's getting keyed, and it's probably just a soft edge. The outline there is probably just they just kind of blurred the edge. That will give it a kind of a blue. It's probably the original blue that's there. They're probably using blue instead of green, because if it's green, then it'll key the field. so it's probably, that's why you're probably seeing a blue edge. I have no idea technically whether that's the case or not, but that'd be my guess. Is that there's a blue image there that they're keying out. Next question. We can't hear you, Bill.
Sorry. comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. Doug says, what killed the Pixel Core, and do you see an OH Office Hours 2.0 organization taking its place in the future, possibly under a different brand?
Yeah. So, I mean, Pixel Core went from being a membership to being production, mostly because of the membership just wasn't sustainable at the time. You know, we just didn't have live streaming. We didn't have video. We didn't have, trying to piece things together, and we just couldn't get enough revenue to make it work. And so we moved to production, and production did really well for a decade. We learned a lot, did a lot of things. And then, we bet, a variety of issues came up, and we bet big on virtual events about a year early, so we kind of pushed it all in, and it was that moment in James Bond where he's just like, he pushed it all in and then he loses. So anyway, so then we closed it up. Office Hours is very much a, definitely a nod towards it. It's not, it's a 2.0. I mean, or technically a 5.0 if you think about the number of times we updated what we were doing there. So it's a Office Hours is definitely thinking towards that goal that Pixel Core had in the past, which was just building a global network of people that can work together. And the thing we did in Pixel Core that I don't think worked as well is we had a handful of people, and then we immediately put them into leadership roles that they weren't necessarily ready for, and everything else. And so one of the things that I did very consciously is not do that at the beginning of this, and just let people emerge, out of a large number of people. And so it was kind of a different approach that I knew was going to be a better approach than what I did before. And it has been. We just an incredible community. And so we'll keep growing it slowly. The one thing I did learn is just the power of slow growth. So, just of letting things kind of just emerge and pull it together. The other thing that we're fixing with Office Hours that we should have done with Pixel Core is make it a nonprofit. So Pixel Core was treated like a nonprofit for 2 decades, operated essentially like that. There wasn't any real profits in it, but we didn't turn it that way, so we didn't take any of the advantage of being a nonprofit. So we're going to the paperwork's all submitted. We're just waiting for the government to get back to us, and once that happens, we'll have a 501c3 status, and then that's going to allow us to kind of operate within that, because that's the way we'd operate anyway. Next question.
Stefan Fischer of Wolfsburg, Germany is up next. And he says, I did a large Zoom meeting with 650 participants recently. It almost crashed because the breakout room extension, which we ordered from Zoom, was not yet in place. Is there a way to check this before the meeting starts without opening a support ticket?
I'm assuming that what you meant was that you, at the last minute, you wanted to upgrade to something higher than 500. And that's how I read it anyway. And then it just took a little while. I mean, what we do is make sure that we have enough people, enough registrations available long before the event, or at least days before the event, to make sure that it's there. Go ahead, Rupert.
I'd just say that if you were ordering that or requesting it through the website, through your admin panel, that can always be a lead time maybe in that if you have an account rep that you can talk to, or if you want to call them and talk to them, then they can give you more realistic expectations. Maybe I spoke to a guy recently who on a Friday, and he said, look, I just can't get this in place until Monday. And that was okay in that case, but just check with them.
And support, I think it's support.zoom.com. That's the Zoom support is actually pretty good and pretty responsive that as far as we found. But you do want to stay, if it's a big event, 650 people, you do want to stay ahead of the registration and go ahead and invest in what you need. It should tell you that it's there, when in your account. You should know how many people it can support. Next question.
Gabriel Ung in Malaysia says, question about computer maintenance over time and after many projects. Is it a good practice to regularly reformat your production machines to ensure they run optimally? Do you keep clean images of your drives?
Go ahead, Rupert.
So I do like to refresh machines on a periodic basis. I have found over many years, though, that imaging is hard work because you have to maintain those images. With the rate of software updates come out for all these applications, you load an image after a few weeks, months even, you're going to be there all day updating, and that might catch you out in production. I'm more of a fan of scripting my installation. So I'll load an OS, and then I'll have a script that will use package installers to get the latest applications that I want. And then if I have a separate config file, maybe I'll import that, and then a script to set up the user interface, in the OS exactly the way I want it. And then you get a usable config much quicker.
Go ahead, Jeffrey, real quick.
Totally agree. It's important to think that your production machine is your production machine. Don't check your email on your production machine. Don't surf the web on your production machine if you can, and put that onto another computer, and then you'll have a better chance of keeping that going. I do a 3-month backup, image backup, and scripting backup as well.
Next question.
Moving to Juan C. Robles in Mexico. He says NDI SDK Developers Conference is tomorrow at 7 Pacific. Any thoughts or expectations?
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
NDI 5, maybe we'll finally see it. I'd really like to get a look at the SDK for NDI 5 as well. So I think we're all waiting.
And we're probably going to have someone come on in August to talk about NDI. Someone that knows a lot about it. So anyway, so we'll so definitely take notes as we get closer to that. We'll give you a little warning on the date. But we've invited someone that knows about as much as you can about it. So next question.
Douglas Carmichael's asking a question for you, Alex. How did you pitch the ADMA concept to the Rwandan government? Did you sell it as a path to developing local production capacity to benefit the Rwandan economy, a tool for enabling greater economic mobility for Rwanda's people, or both?
Yeah, so the first thing I did is I spent 10 years in Africa working, in and out of Africa, working on it. The hard part with most of these programs is you have to start 10 years before you need it. So going in and just saying, I can do this thing is one thing, but being able to show behind the scenes photos of you working on it for 10 years really makes things a lot easier. So, so I was invited, again, this comes into who literally sitting next to a plane, someone on a plane who knew somebody at Carnegie Mellon who I ended up, because I was in Pittsburgh, I ended up hanging out at their office. And then when they had this program with the Rwandan government and the World Bank and a bunch of other folks that were in DC, I went in and I used a really good Keynote slide, Keynote deck, and I was, competing with, or not, I don't know if competing is the right word, but working with a lot of folks that were, more challenged when it came to that. So it stood out. And so strong Keynote slide sold the idea. And then it still took us another 2 years of going back and forth. One of the big things I kind of did is I held out. They were like, well, let's start with 3 computers. And I was like, I need 20. I need 20 computers. I need this stuff. We need to properly invest it or we won't get it off the ground. That you'll just be another little experiment, and so I wasn't willing to spend the time on it and really dig into it unless we got what we needed. And the Rwandan government is very serious about these kinds of things. And really what we did do is approach it as a workforce development program. And we were actually part of the workforce development agency. So the goal is to use media as an economic stimulus, for emerging countries. And that's what I've kind of focused on the whole time is how do you get people working in the area? I'm not worried about diplomas or anything else. I just want to get people jobs, and so that was really the focus of what we did there. And the advantage that we also outlined for it is that it accelerates everything. So media in an emerging country, in any community, accelerates tourism, it accelerates education, it accelerates, government communication. It's an accelerant to everything else that's happening in the community because it accelerates communication. So, so that's kind of, how we did it. But we actually, the math that I did in numbers was really showing about how it would pay for itself, tax-based expansion, over 10 years. Like you put this money into it here, and this is how much they're making. This is how much taxes you're taking out. So tax-based expansion was how I sold the. I don't know whether it penciled out in the end that way, but we've been graciously supported by the Rwandan government for a long time to do what we're doing, and I think we're in the process of going into a new building, which will be exciting when it's finished. Next question. I can't hear you, Bill.
I'm sorry. Whoops, it just went away. That's interesting.
Go ahead.
Let's see if I can get it back here.
Just keep going. We're out of time.
Oh, okay. Guy Cochran, John Preto, are you seeing Vegas open back up for event?
Yeah, so Vegas is coming. It's 100%. The room rates are through the roof. It's just crazy. The big conventions are operating at in between 40 to 60% occupation is what I'm hearing. But the strip's fully open now. Some of the big shows aren't open yet, but we're at near capacity now.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So it's not Vegas, but I'm here in one of the regional areas in the Chicago metro area, and there's a regional convention center here, which is basically mothballed.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Vegas is. I mean, some of them are making sense, and I will say for NAB, I was blown away that almost everything's sold out right next to the convention center, even though the convention center itself is only half full. So it's an interesting puzzle. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back. How did the software vendors respond to the PXC concept? Were they initially open to granting educational licenses for their products, even though PXC was not a traditional school?
Yeah, we started with a handful of, I'll keep it quick because we're running out of time, but we started with a handful of vendors that were, I'd worked with for a long time that didn't have a lot to lose, just, from that process. And then as we kept on proving that it was a great model and that it made folks a lot of money, we really were pushing the subscription model a couple of years before the subscription model became a thing. So we were kind of a test case, I think, for a lot of them. And then they decided it worked. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael again. What was your experience been with the nano-textured glass on the Intel iMacs? Is it much harder to maintain than the conventional glass?
Just use water and a soft cloth and you'll be okay. That's the key. Next question.
Doug's back again for the next question with, if the PCX organization and brand are dead, are there plans to move Meccano out of the PCX lab domain and into the 090 domain to market it as an 090 product?
It's going to be its own product. It won't be. That's a whole nother conversation. Next question.
And it's another one, and the last one from Doug. Could PCX be resurrected as a buyer's club that partners with a training platform, like with the growth of services like Persona Sphere and Reason Studios, Reason Plus? I could see a PCX bundled subscription being appealing to students and learners.
I think that we're focused on office hours, so I think office hours can do that. so I think that we'll look at opportunities there. I don't think we need to be a buyer's club, but I think we just need to. But I don't think we need to bring back PXE. So I think office hours is the new thing. So anyway, so now we are right on time, blowing through those and getting them ready to go. So we're going to change subjects now to Luma Keying. Now, Luma Keying is one of the tools that you have access to in the ATEM. And we're going to talk specifically about the ATEM, but this actually applies to many switchers and many things that are there. Now, if you're using a software switcher, most of the time you can use an alpha channel. But if you're using a ATEM or any other hardware switcher, you're going to have to do something. Now, you can either send in two signals, and those two signals are going to be a key and a fill. So the fill is the color of whatever you're sending in, and the key is a black and white alpha channel that's going to key it out. So those are, that's one way to go in, but a lot of times we don't have that. We have an image that we have to key out, or we may have a signal that we have to key out. We don't have the ability. We have an HDMI out of our laptop, and we have to get it in there. One of the things that you can do as an upstream key is you can use a chroma key, and I'll lean on other folks here to show some of those things. I have an image that I'll pull up while we're talking, but with the chroma key, you're going to pull those edges. You're going to pull the key, but there's a couple disadvantages. One is to know that you have to do that in the upstream. So if you want to you can't do it as a downstream key in an ATEM. So you can't use a chroma key in that area. So you're going to limit what you can do there. The second is that the switchers, almost all switchers, run on 422. And then what that means is that they are half the color resolution as they are to the Luma information. So if you have a 1920 by 1080 image, you're actually keying a 960 by 540 image. And then your map, that's what's pulling your key from a chroma image is half the resolution, technically 75%, but we'll just say half the resolution of your image. So you're going to get stair stepping, and where you'll see that is in curved edges. And I'm going to try to. I realize I put up a black and white sample, but I'll work on that. And so that what you start to see there is some breakup in the in those edges as you start to pull those keys. And so Luma keys are allow you to do some things that they do have their own limitations, but they do allow you to do some things relatively effectively. I think Ken might even have some examples. I saw him testing things, so I'm gonna let Ken show a little bit about what he's doing there. And I just threw it to Ken. Ken he wasn't even turning around going, "I'll take the ball." I just passed it straight to him. So so Ken, do you have something you can show? Did I come to you too quickly?
No, I can show. Oh, I need to turn on. It's one thing you have to remember on the switcher to turn on the key so you can actually demonstrate. So this is the one that I use whenever someone's using Wi-Fi. Now you can see with my edges, which is something that will sort out. You can see part of the green image that's on there, but that's an example of keying or what I do, the mic checks.
And one of the things that you, and what's cool here is that this is all a bunch of graphics that you basically have an app that will do this for free. This is Keynote, but you're as far as some of the animations might be different, but PowerPoint will do it as well. You know, all of these things are using the animations that are kind of built in to what you have there and are able to simply key over it relatively quickly. Does anyone else have anything else they want to show before we jump into the questions? And I'll show a little bit in a minute, but Carl's gone white and then orange. and you know, the simple Luma key is what I'm showing here. If you you see that my little telestrator here. So this is just a color with a Luma key. So that's one way that it can be used, you know, in that in that environment, is to use it as a key there. I don't key it over green because otherwise I would see the aliasing along those edges. And usually when I see other people do it, even in our group, we kind of see that. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah,
Yes.
There we go.
Lost you.
Sorry. So the idea of keying is somehow putting two images together, and I think that we've blasted through this real quick. I think it's important to state that there are basically three ways that you can key. You can key just off the luminance of something.
Mm-hmm.
If something is brighter, you can separate it from the darker. You can, if you have, you had mentioned alpha channels. If the device that you're keying with or from has the ability to output a pure black and white portion of that screen, version of that graphic, then you can use that black and white to separate the black from what you want to see and what you don't want to see. And then of course we'll get to chroma key, where it takes one color and removes it. But basically we're talking about different ways to separate one half of the image that we want to see from the other half of the image that we don't want to see. And you're doing a luminance key, but adjusting the gain of the key, correct?
Yeah. So let me show you this real quickly. So as we kind of look at it here, so what you have here is a gradient, and what I'm doing, let me show you here. I'm going to pull this into here. All right. So I guess I can't really show you in two different. Well, we'll figure this out. Anyway, so I actually can. Well, anyway, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut this. And now I'm keying over it. Hold on, let me. I have so many screens that I get a little lost every once in a while. So, what you're looking at here is this pre-multiplied key. So this is what I'm looking at. And I have two major controls over it, and that's my clip and my gain. The clip is where the key is going to happen. The gain is how hard it's going to happen. And so I'm using color here, and I'm just using the image as my key source. So the fill is just a raw color. That's why it just kind of shows up there. So yeah, we'll have it keyed over top. So now you can kind of see both at the same time. So when I move this key, what it's doing is it's saying, I'm going to let everything in over here, or I'm going to start to pull those out. And those numbers are showing you what percentage. So you can see as I turn it up a little bit, And if I turn my gain up, it's like all or nothing here. You can see as it kind of opens it up. And so what I can do is as I turn that clip up, you can see it moving, you know, so it's literally clipping, you know, clipping those areas. Now, as I turn my gain up, it's increasing the contrast of that, of how it's happening. You know, so I turn it all the way up. It's either at 80 or 90%, it's all on or all off. As I back away, you can see how I start to get my gradients back. So as I pull my my gain back, you can see the gain, as the gain goes to a lower number, what you're able to see is that you have more gradations there. And then then I can again push where that's happening, the midpoint of how that's happening with my clip here. And as I turn that, so you can see there that we can open it back up again. And so you can actually get, and what I'm looking at the gain here, see how it turns gray here. If I bring it in just a little bit, I can get to a point, and what you're looking for there is when I turn it on and off. So if we turn it off, on, what I want to look for is in that background does not change. You know, if it changes, it means that your clip isn't hard enough there. And so
Alex, could you show, for argument's sake, could you just show us the media player 1 image, not keyed over anything, so we can see what the original source file looks like?
So there's the media 1 image right here.
Okay, so it's
you can
just
see it
white
there.
over black, and is what type? Is it a JPEG?
It's a JPEG.
PNG, JPEG.
Yeah,
so
just
and
JPEG
JPEGs have no alpha channel, so you're not getting any help from the kind of hidden transparency channel or the alpha channel.
Right. And the advantage here is you can see this pure white just goes to here, but you can see this gradient is going to here. And a lot of people think that they can't get gradients inside of Luma keys, but you're seeing that I'm actually getting semi-transparent pixels. And so a lot of what you want to be thinking about as you do this is you want to, when you design your work, I mean, obviously you can still key things that have black in them. You just need to raise the blacks just a little bit so that you can get them because you can see things that are even completely, you know, black. Now things get complicated when you can see how hard it is for me to keep that semi-transparency when I'm, you know, when you're doing this, but here's it, even at 5%, I've turned my clip way down, and you can see that I'm able to even make that 5% black. There's now that's all the way on. So I don't have what I give up to get to that 5% is because I only have a couple blacks to work with. So you can see how there's not much here to use. Whereas if I have something that's lighter, if I open this up and I increase that clip, you can see now that I have what I have here is, I can't do anything that's really dark, but things that are kind of in the middle, this is 25% black, is already completely opaque, but I now have a ton of gray levels to work with. And that's going to mean that I have, you know, softer edges and so on and so forth around what I'm doing. Now I can, if we look at that heart, we have to, you know, decide, and I may have keyed that one pretty hard there. Let's see here. So, but what we want to think about is, and when we have whites is where we're going to be able to do the most, you know, work with it. Anyway, so that's something to kind of consider there. Let's go ahead and jump to the questions.
Sure. The first one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael, and Doug says, could the same Luma Keying concepts demonstrated at the ATEM be applied to other software and hardware-based switchers?
Absolutely. I mean, there's some version of a Luma key in everything. We've been using the same Luma key process for 30 years at least. So definitely it's available. And until key fill became relatively popular, we used it all the time, even in production as recently, well, even now, you know. And again, one of the things that I've really gotten into is doing these Luma keys, just what you saw Ken do, where I do my presentations. I'll do a lot of my presentations now without ever going to a full screen. So while people are, there you go. So you see Carl putting it up over in front of him. What I'm finding is when it comes to engagement, if I want to show things, especially if I have a nice, it's one of the reasons that I use this background, is that if I have a flat background, I can have things just popping up next to me while I'm talking. and it's a lot nicer. Instead of putting yourself in front of the, like a little key, a weird little key in the corner, or a little pip that you have there, you just have it all around you. And you can design, you know, how that's going to occur, and it can feel like it's behind you or feel like it's in front of you, you know, based on that. So it's just definitely something to consider. Next question
comes from TJ Asher, and TJ says, I created an animated lower third graphic for Victor's sax jam. It fades in and out. When I applied with a Luma, I see the graphic as black when it fades. Is this a problem with the graphic or with the key threshold?
And when it fades out. Yeah, that's going to be your, that's because of the way it's managing that alpha channel. Yeah, so that there is a little bit of a, without an actual alpha channel, I think what's happening is it's fading how it occurs. What that has to do with is the clip. So it's doing a linear fade out, but because the clip, what's happening is that it's not getting to that clip fast enough. So it's leaving a black mark. It's fading both of them out at the same time. The color's disappearing, but it's still getting it in that linear key going across it. What it's not doing is it's not a proportional fade. And that's the problem you have there. Go ahead, Carl.
So this is something Alex actually mentioned earlier when we talked about this, and I helped Husmic with his presentation. When you're using Keynote, you can't use fade in, fade out if you're doing Lumakey. You have to do slide in, slide out, either disappear, type in, type out. So it has to be all or nothing. So you're right, Alex, because remember you had a graphic that faded out, and it does a weird thing to the key because it eventually goes to black and it does something weird.
Well, it's fading both of them out at the same time. Now, one thing that I haven't tried is if you put it on a second, if you had another ME, you know, if you fade it in and out, it should fade together at that point. You know, so if you were keying it that way,
because if you had, that's like having an alpha almost.
Because you grab the whole thing, because it's because it's doing both those individual channels at the same time that's causing that problem. Next question. Can't hear you.
Graham Cardwell, Belfast, Northern Ireland. What is the difference between clip and gain on the Luma Key controls? We use them to remove black backgrounds from lyrics, but we found that the settings by guesswork. What's the science behind it?
The clip is essentially where it's applying that key, and the gain is how hard the contrast of that key. So that's how hard you're going to push it. That's what go ahead, Chris.
We mentioned this before. If you think of what you show versus what you don't show as like water in a glass, the clip is how high the water is. So only show the stuff above the water. The gain is how steep the beach is.
Right.
So if you were to look at an island from above, you would see the sand feathering out into the deep of the ocean. So the gain is how steep is that beach, and the clip is how high is the water.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so you just want to, and it's really useful to do exactly what I showed there, which is when you want to figure something out, you got to figure out some kind of tool that's going to let you see it happening. So you can try to key what you're doing, but what you want to do is actually grab some kind of image like this, and this helps a lot. And I can push this in Makana, but it's really easy. I mean, or into I can push this into Discord. It's a pretty simple image. It's just a couple different boxes, but most importantly is the gradient. And the gradient will help you a lot because you're going to be able to see as I grab the gain. And as you start to move that, you're going to start to understand what it's actually doing. And here you can see it to what Chris was talking about, increasing the hardness of that key. And then as I move the clip, it's how high, like where is it cutting off? So you can see me moving the clip to a higher and higher number. And now you can see me I can now open that back up to and there, what you want to see here is if you're using lighter graphics, now you can see that now that I've moved this clip all the way up, I don't even have anything that's 100%. So you have to kind of figure out where you can see that becoming But you can actually get, when you're looking at this, there's a lot of semi-transparent pixels that are going on here that you didn't have before. So those are the things that you want to kind of look at. Now, what I will say is that it is hard to do that. It's hard to get that key perfect if you're using logos. So if you're doing like a little semi-transparent or a very, very detailed logo, you really want to have the key fill. The key fill is going to be what you need. A pre-multiplied key fill is going to do better for you. This does have its limits to what it does well. Next question.
Moving on, Doug Johnson in Orem, Utah is next. And Doug says, what hardware have you used successfully for outputting alpha keyed video from a computer?
Go ahead, Peter. I can't hear you.
I mean, I just used Mimo Live and running on my Mac Pro.
What's the hardware?
WX5700.
But what's the hardware that you're outputting from Mimo Live to do key fill out is the question.
The W5700X, the actual graphics card will do it.
You have a graphics card that is that has two outputs, that has two HDMI outputs.
I have one that has 5.
Right. Yeah. And who's the manufacturer?
It's the Apple card, but I'm presuming it's
AMD.
AMD, yeah.
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, Decklink is commonly seen used for these. So you can have a 2 in 2 out there. Well, there's many Decklinks, but 2 in 2 out is common one you'll see for this kind of project.
Yep. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. I have several of the Decklink 8K Pros, which are awesome.
Yeah. So go ahead, Chris.
It's astonishing to me how few people really understand the fact that the key signal out. Several years ago, late 80s, I was actually working in the Compact Studios in the South Bay, and I was I couldn't figure out why the CG wouldn't key right, and somebody there said, "Oh, well, you have to play with this thing." I go, "That shouldn't be that hard," and I actually snooped into the machine room where I absolutely wasn't supposed to go, and it wasn't plugged in. The key wasn't even plugged into the switcher, so a lot of people aren't.
A lot of people don't use it. Like they either and what we did, I have to admit, for a long time I used the chroma key. But again, the limitations of the chroma key is you will not be able to do a clean feed because you're now keying it into the upstream key. So the thing your upstream key and your downstream key, the main difference is the upstream key is being embedded into the video signal as it goes through. There's no way to separate it later, and the downstream key happens at the end. And so when you have a clean feed out, and that's super useful to have both of those. And so the upstream key is great for a lot of different things, DVEs and other things. I very rarely want to key it. Now, if you're keying a person into their set, the upstream key is fine. Like that's what you're trying to build a video signal, and that's what it's designed for. But when you're adding lower third graphics and you're adding bugs and everything else, that's where you generally want a downstream key so that you have a clean version of it that doesn't have all those things when you're doing your show. And so being able to understand how to take full advantage of the Luma key is helpful. Go ahead, Bill.
I also want to just talk about creating the shots to be keyed later. I'm working on the office hours most recent remotes video, and I'm not going to give away too much before we debut it, but it has a lot of Luma Keying in it. And we shot it on a lot of different cameras, whatever anybody had that day. So you'll get footage in that is all shot to the best everybody could do using all these different cameras. The black levels are a little bit all over the place. Somebody was shooting in 422, somebody was shooting in 444, somebody was shooting on a compressed format like H.264, somebody was shooting on a GoPro in Cineform. All of these are coming in supposedly having blacks, but all those blacks are varying a little bit in how they're created, whether they have noise, whether they're all at the same level. So you go to put a Luma key on it, and you're tweaking a lot. So the controls that Alex was showing you become mission critical to be able to take multiple keys and get a relatively similar effect from them so that you can composite smartly together and it doesn't look too goofy. But it's so fiddly sometimes that I've actually had to use a separate tool that increases contrast dramatically. So I can literally see the difference between 99% transparent and 100% transparent, because put on another monitor, you'll actually see a line I don't want you to see at the border of two keys that are overlapping, because they're all made squares and I don't want them to be squares. So keying can be very fiddly and precise when you get into the weeds of how it's done.
Go ahead, next question. Can't hear you.
Douglas Carmichael, and the ATEM Mini marketing is his topic. And he says their marketing mentions an advanced chroma key, but not a Luma key. Would these same features work on the Mini?
Yeah, so the Mini has, I don't have it. I have to admit that I realize I'm not really set up to do a chroma key today. I just don't have the inputs, or I don't have the files to grab that really quickly. I'll see if I can find it while we're talking. I may have some on some drive here. I just have to look for it. But the advanced chroma key is technology. It's a linear key that was learned. They basically pulled some of that data from the purchase of Ultimat. Now the Ultimat has a lot more tools, a lot more dials, but a linear key is actually a fairly simple key. It's not the basic linear key or basic linear chroma key, or advanced chroma key is what they call it. The chroma key just identifies a color, and a range, so it's a very, very blunt tool, and you'd get pretty bad keys with it. I mean, most chroma keying is pretty bad, and the older, it was kind of barely useful for some of the older stuff. A linear key, a chroma key, is what it does is it takes this is the most basic version of it. They do a little bit of extra sauce to it, but you basically you average red plus blue divided by 2, and then you take this and you subtract it from the green. Like that's the math of an advanced keyer. And they have some little bells and whistles, but that's the most basic. It's the average of these two. And sometimes what you do is you have a slider between these two that is going to bias towards the blue or bias towards the red, as you start to do that, so that you can have a little bit more control over what that looks like. And then of course you can decide how you can also bias the entire equation away from the green. Now why is that useful? Well, when the green in this background, let's just say this was green, all of this will be near 1, right? If you're thinking of it 0 to 1 rather than 0 to 255 or 1 to 255, or 0 to 255. This is all near 1, and this is going to be some low number, because there's hopefully not a lot of green. So this might be, let's say 0.2, here. So when I take this, and if this red and blue is higher than 0.2, whatever's here is going to be black, right? Because it's going to go to 0. 0 is black. So when you subtract these, when you average them together and subtract them, now, if there's not a lot of red in this background and not a lot of blue in the background, when you subtract that center, this is going to go to black, but this is going to have some version of gray, because it's going to be the red and blue are less than the 1 or the 0.7 or 0.8 that the green is. And so that's the game you're playing. And that's how an advanced keyer works. And then what you're doing is you're just affecting contrast. Like how much do you subtract? How hard do you push the mat? And that mat is just a black and white map, and where it is, technically where it's black is where it's going to get, is you're going to keep. You end up inverting that key. So the way that a keyer works in general is that when you look at the key that we're doing, Luma key or chroma key, is you have an image and you have one down below. And basically what you're doing is you take your alpha channel, that black and white map, and you multiply it. That's what we call pre-multiplying. It's because you actually multiply it. Now, you're probably wondering, like, how does multiply? Wouldn't it all make it brighter? Not if it's 0. So if it's 0, if it's 0, if it's 1, it has 1 times something is nothing, right? So 1 times 1 times is the same as the image. 0 is going to make it black, and the grays will make it somewhere in between. And so basically, when you multiply this down, you knock a hole in it. You take that's your background image. You then take the foreground image and you invert that alpha channel. And you do this exactly the same thing. You knock out the background, and then you add them together. That's how a composite works. And so Luma Keying is just doing this one operation. Chroma Keying has to go through a process of generating that mat, then doing that operation. But that's the difference between the two. Next question.
Moving on to Dave Kaufman in Vancouver, British Columbia. And he says, why does Luma Key work so much better than Chroma Key? Why should it be harder for the keyers to anti-alias green transitions than ones to black?
Go ahead, Carl.
Chroma Key works much better if you've got a weather presenter, let's put it that way. So there are cases where you've got a human in front of a screen where we see it on movies still, green and blue screen. But for graphics like I do, and like Ken does, well, Ken's actually he's choosing to use a Chroma Key for his system, but that's his choice. I'm using, well, I can quickly get it up again if we just do this real quick, but I'm using a, so we go there and we put me in the background. So what I'm doing is I'm using, so I've got to go up a tiny bit because my clips, so that's my clip, there we go. So this is a Luma Key, and you can tell it's a Luma Key because there's a shadow underneath the camera. That's kind of the giveaway. It's a Luma Key, where if I click this button, there we go, now it's a linear key. So I've actually got this graphic. This is I use this in the post show once to show the difference between a Luma Key and a linear key, because the shadow it can give. So the nice shadow it can give with the linear key, where with the Luma Key, it's a hard shadow. So I can control the shadow, but it's going to be a hard line. But with a linear key, it maintains the transparency underneath the camera there and the graphics as well. There's a shadow. So I created this little graphic for a post show demonstration I did. But it's much better for those kind of.
Yeah, and the main thing is that the Chroma Key, what the fundamental thing is that the Chroma Key is working with half the resolution or less than the full raster because of the 422, because the switcher itself is operating. Now in Zoom, you probably won't notice, but I definitely notice it when we're broadcasting. If someone's using a Chroma Key, you can see, and if your edges are square, won't matter, but if your edges are curved, it will. There are advantages to the green screen using Chroma Key in some areas, like for instance, motion blur. You'll get more data if it's blurring in and out than you would with a Luma Key. Next question.
Comes to us from Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Hi, Graham. When Luma Keying, we sometimes lose definition in the edges of text characters. Do we need more gain or less clip, or should we key against a black background instead of the presentation scalar for both inputs?
I assume you're talking about keying. You always want to key over a black background if you can. I mean, that's kind of, I mean, the image should be over black. For that, and if you're cutting it out of anything else, anything that's less than black, the perfect thing is black with a white foreground, because now you have tons of data to work with, because you've got tons of range. It is a mixture between the clip and the clip has to find the color that you have, and then the gain is going to give you as much reach as possible. Go ahead, Carl.
So Luma keys were actually used back in the 70s for music videos, because Vidicon tubes would go to full black and they just simply filmed the talent on a black background and could put them on a psychedelic. And because it was the 70s, they were wearing quite loud clothes. They weren't wearing black. That came in the 80s. So because they were wearing brightly colored costumes in these music videos back in the 70s, they were able to do it live. They could actually shoot a psychedelic, essentially shooting a TV, shooting itself. So they get the feedback on the television. So you get this trippy pattern, and then they just film the performers all dressed in bright colors against a Duvetine black background, and they could Luma key them directly in the way we do green screen now. But you can do that, and it is quite fun to do that. If you've got some black Duvetine, it is quite fun to actually have that, play around with doing that. Just don't have anyone wearing anything black.
And by the way, for our producers, it'll be a short show if you don't ask any more questions. We're running a little low on the questions, and maybe we've answered all the questions you need to know about Luma Keying. But go ahead, Bill.
Well, since we were talking about text, the other thing that's well useful to keep in mind is text has a lot of attributes, including the text generators will sometimes add bevels or shadows and things like that change their luminance values and or the color of them. So sometimes keying texts can be a little tricky, particularly since if you're putting it over video, that video can be changing. So you can be in a relatively high key bright scene and you can swing the camera over and be in a darker screen. So I think text color and text backgrounds and edges can change.
Next question. Can't hear you.
Sorry, Devin Gratian, I believe, of Manchester, UK. Why is key and fill via HDMI from a laptop and so forth not more widely supported in software, especially since the 8-channel ATEMs could make use of it?
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
I think we kind of alluded to it earlier. You actually need 2 HDMI outputs to make that work. And I don't know of any laptops that support twin HDMI. Maybe, and I don't think DisplayPort will push it.
Yeah, I think that you can use 2 DisplayPort. I haven't tried it in a long time, and I think the problem that you really get into is sync. So is it going to send those out exactly the same time? When you're using a card, it can fire them out at the same time. But when you're using 2 DisplayPort, mini DisplayPort to HDMI's,
dual link DisplayPort.
Yeah, it's not going to put it out, and it has to be perfect. Like the framing has to, the frame for frame has to come out exactly the same, or you'll see edges. So that's the thing that hasn't happened from a base. You always have to have something that you're going to go out to, and there are the variety of Ultra Studios that will also have. There's some of the Ultra Studios that'll have 2 outputs as well. So you can hook it to your laptop and actually make that work as well.
JJ just said out on Discord that he's got one that has 2 mini HDMI outs, but it's certainly not the norm, right? It's not the norm.
Yep.
In terms of.
Yep. Next question.
Moving on, Douglas Carmichael wants to know, would you be using a Luma key when you're putting a person into a virtual environment? I know you can track the person and key a virtual avatar, but would you use Luma Keying for bringing a person's image into a virtual environment?
No, that's exactly what we use Chroma Keying for. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so that's exactly where Chroma Key actually wins that race.
Yeah, I mean, because you're now embedded in, because that's the other advantage of Luma Key is that you can have it in a downstream key. The Chroma Key is shooting person over green is exactly why you do that, is so you have all this detail and it's all moving and you have all the detail that you have there, and you do give up. When it works, like I'm not keying myself. One of the reasons I moved away from keying myself is that I started using my Constellation for something else, because I would always key in my Constellation at twice the resolution at 4K, and then output at 1080. And so then it gave me that resolution back on my edges that I don't get if you're keying on the same resolution. So you are going to have a little bit of stair stepping, a little bit of aliasing in a 1080 key inside of an ATEM, but most people don't notice, but a couple of us do. Next question.
Andre Dahle, again in Berlin, is there a difference in Luma Keying with a black background against Luma Keying with a transparent instant alpha background?
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so we call that linear key if it's an alpha background. So that was the example I was showing before, where you got the nice clean shadow underneath the camera versus very hard shadow. Hard shadow was Luma, linear key was a nice clean shadow.
Next question. Can't hear you, Bill.
Philip Solar, Cantona, New York, strategies in designing graphics for Luma Keying. I have a client provide logos with black in them. I've changed the level of black to get around this, but I'm changing their logos. Not ideal. Any other solutions?
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, a linear key. So you can bring it into Photoshop or Keynote and just make a linear key where so the background's transparent, and nearly every software switcher in the ATEMs will know how to handle that.
If they're not animated, the reason you're going to use a Luma key is really because you want to animate things. If you're going to have them be non-animated, then you want to have you want to actually use the keyer. Bill.
And Luma Key doesn't mean necessarily black. You can Luma Key over white just as easily. So if you have a dark logo, you can use 255, 255, 255 as your key, and it'll be pure white, and that'll go away.
You'll typically have some edge issues when you do it that way. So if you go the other direction, you'll have some edging issues. Next question.
Tony Mobley of Newman, Georgia, is back in with, where should a beginner start with this process? ATEM Mini or Keynote or both?
Both. I mean, the thing to do is the best. You've seen Carl and Ken and I. We just did it by doing it. So
experiment. Have some fun.
Experiment.
I created a dancing baby in 60 seconds when I saw the question. So experiment.
Yeah. So it's just, you can just take an image. I use, a lot of times I don't have it hooked up right now, but I usually have my iPad just going straight into my computer, and I have it, suspended next to me, so I can just sit there and go through it. And as I tap things are just kind of, flowing out. So yeah, just experiment with it. Get Keynote in there. We can, we're going to bring labs back in August. So as we do that, we'll probably do maybe some keying labs, where we just give everybody some images and we all work on it together. So stay tuned for that, but go ahead and play with it. It's easy. Next question.
Nate Hill, Salt Lake City, Utah. Can you explain why TGA files alpha key better than PNG or TIFF files in an ATEM switcher?
I have a theory, and I have a theory is that the ping is not really keeping, even if you have a pre-multiplied image, it's maintaining that transparency as part of the image. And so, because that's how pings kind of hold the image. So with a TGA is a very old format. And one of the things, the first time we see aliasing in an ATEM, I immediately go, oh, you need a TGA file, and I know that the pings will kind of work, but when we put high detail, we've just found that it's more reliable to use a TGA file. You can export that from Photoshop or Affinity Photo. Affinity Photo actually added it for us. A couple of us were requesting it, to be there. But we found that the edges are better on really fine detail. Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say for the lower Fenwicks that I've been making for people, about half of the people have them as TGA files and half of them are exported as PNGs. And I can't tell which one I like.
It's hard to tell over Zoom. We can build a detailed. We've just had consistent problems. Like the first thing I do when I'm looking at very fine detailed text and I see aliasing, I just have people switch to TGA and it goes away. Go ahead, Carl.
So I've been doing some A/B comparisons between TGA and 16-bit TIFF. There's essentially no difference but file size. They're humongous, of course, for TIFF.
Yeah, and I haven't had as much success actually with TIFF. I mean, I just find that the TGA just works. Like it's just when you do it, it just works. Now it does need to be pre-multiplied to black. So the RGB cannot be transparent. It cannot be white. It needs to be black to do that because of the nature of how the keyer works. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I love using vector programs. So that's why I use Affinity Designer for everything. But so when I was playing around with motion, because they don't accept vector, that's another benefit of the TGA files. Yes, they were big, but they looked good, almost as good as a vector in motion. So
and there's a lot of emotion. It really has to do with the fact that there's this little cheat that ATEM's doing, which is that, remember that thing I told you about where we take the alpha channel, and if you think about it like this is your color image. We're gonna take the alpha channel and we're gonna punch that hole out, and then we're gonna invert that alpha channel and do it again to the other image that you're gonna composite together. So if you think of this as the background and you think of this as the foreground, what an ATEM doesn't do to save processor speed is it punches the hole out of the background, and then it doesn't do this other keying operation. It just adds this on top. So that's why it has to be pre-multiplied to black, is because it's just going to add it, and the black is 0 and it won't be added. But this hole is being knocked into the background, but there's not a hole being added to the foreground to set down on top of it. And that's why you have to have it pre-multiplied to black. And I also think that's related to why the pings don't work as well. Next question.
Tony Mobley asks, is there a lab possible for all this stuff?
Yeah, we're going to do that. We'll do it in, we will do it in August. So just remind me in August and we'll get it into the lab. We're going to have a lot of lab in August. Next question.
Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Where, if anywhere, do you find the linear key in ATEM's 1ME?
You'll find it in the same place that you find it in the ATEM switcher. They're all the same software. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so in the software, you'll find it as you have to click on the pre-multiply. That's kind of the differentiator there.
Yeah, we say linear key, but it's when you click on pre-multiply, that's what it's doing. It takes those controls away because it's just relying on the alpha channel. Next question.
Our friend Sky is looking for some definitions. For a new person, he's looking for the definitions, technically, for Luma, Chroma, Transparency, Alpha, Lift, Gamma, and Gain.
Well, the Luma, of course, is the black and white information. That's what we call it. Luma. Chroma is color. So that's why it's going to be a color key. Transparency, of course, is what's visible and what's not. Your alpha channel is what controls that transparency. It's a black and white matte that is where it's typically, the way you look at it is where it's white, it's going to be opaque, and where there's the alpha channel. So that's the black and white map that controls the visibility. So where it's white, it's going to be opaque, and where it's black, it's going to be transparent. Lift is generally lift is considered the black levels. Gamma tends to be the midpoint. roughly. It's a very big simplification. And gain, it tends to be contrast in this case, or it can be considered on an ATEM, the white levels. So those are some of the different areas that you have there, and I'm simplifying that a bit. Next question. Can't hear you, Bill.
I'm sorry, one more time. James Babbitt in San Diego says, which programs do you usually use when you're using keying, such as Final Cut Pro, Motion, and so forth?
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Well, Final Cut has a really decent keyer built in. I say really decent because there are superior keyers, but it's basically a really good set of tools, particularly since the 4.0 update, which was like 4 years ago when they redid the entire color controls suite in Final Cut.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say kind of the same thing. The thing about the keying any image that has its own alpha channel in Final Cut is it just works. It really just works. You throw it in, it has transparency. And my common way of working is I just render everything as something, with a 444, that already has the alpha channel. The chroma keyer works okay. I'm not crazy about it, but
and by the way, for animated lower thirds and graphics that you want to use key fill, the HyperDeck Mini will do a key fill out. So it'll do A and B out as well. So you can have it there and you can fire them off. So
that's a slightly different use case scenario because that's going to play off live, not sit in your timeline. But yes.
No. I'm just talking about just reminding people that that's another possibility.
Right.
It came up for me when I was thinking about 444. Next question.
JJ McKenna in San Rafael says, when presenting Office Hours 2.0, there was an issue with the length of the questions keyed. Is there a good guide for the correct ratio of screen space to use when keying?
Just that was less of a screen space issue as far as keying goes, and more of just how much text are we going to put on the screen, and how much space are we providing for that. So it's more of a design issue than a keying issue. Next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles says, a bit off topic from the Lumakey topic. Are any of the panelists using a virtual background? If so, can they describe their basic keying setup?
We are not using virtual backgrounds, and we tend not to like them. I think that we have used them in the past. I've used them in the past. I feel like the key has to be nearly perfect or it's not worth doing. And I strongly believe that it creates cognitive load. So it means it's something else you're ignoring when you're looking at other people. You're actually filtering that out subconsciously, and when you do that, it's actually it's part of what we kind of tend to refer to as Zoom fatigue, is related to the fact that we're ignoring all the things that aren't right. Go ahead, Chris.
I've actually been keyed over my background for the last 3 months.
Exactly. All right, next question.
Next question comes from Douglas Carmichael. Douglas Carmichael's in with, if I was creating graphics to be Luma keyed with an ATEM Mini, would I need a dedicated output from my Mac to send the graphic to the ATEM?
Go ahead, Carl.
No, so if it's just Luma key, you're just going to be using a HDMI, just a signal. As long as your background to that graphics is black, then you just tune it like 7%, as Alex was showing before. Get your percentage of your clip and your gain correct. It's about 75% on the gain. And so for graphics made in Keynote anyway, I find 75% on the gain and 7% on the clip works perfectly fine. It gives you a nice little bit of soft edges for the Luma keys. That's all you need. It's just HDMI signal into your ATEM Mini.
Bill?
And the ATEM Mini has what's called a media pool. You can drag graphics into it and key with them in the upstream and downstream keyer, so you don't need a live source for things.
And generally, if you're going to pull something in to your ATEM Mini as a still store, you want to use an alpha channel. Like you don't want a Luma key if you don't have to. So the reason a lot of times we use that Luma key is because it's going to be animated, because it's going to be fed into it, because it's going to, there's reasons to use that. If you're going to use an actual image, save that alpha channel out. Next question.
Scott P. in Philadelphia is up next, and he asks, do you employ the Blackmagic Ultra Studio Minis in your workflow to help with key fill graphics when using ATEM Minis?
Usually when I don't do it with ATEM Minis as much. Usually when we're doing key fill out, I've generally used a full one of the Constellation or 4ME, 2ME, 1ME. And in those cases, we're using typically a DeckLink card or an Ultra Studio. And I haven't used the Ultra Studio Mini in that format. Next question.
Kaufman, and Dave Kaufman's in Vancouver, BC, says, when I compare Keynote text over black versus over green, the Lumakey text edges look great, but the chroma key text edges are greenish and pixely. Something to do with anti-alias text, perhaps? What could be going on?
It's because, and as we discussed a little bit earlier, it is because the green is the green of the chroma key is half the resolution of the luminance information, and so you're going to get stair stepping. And then that green, you can in the advanced keyer, you should be able to get rid of the green pixely part, but because it's got some edge correction. But yeah, go ahead, Chris.
In the list of Alex Lindsay things to do, you should really do an updated redo version 2.0 of the Road to 1080p talk that you did 20 or 15 years ago.
It's still
everything I know about green screening in the digital world I learned from you, and it is,
I don't even know where it is. I have to find it again.
It's so good, and it should be like anybody who tries to key anything should commit that to memory before they touch a switcher or a knob or a piece of, or a mouse.
It's still today. I don't know what the views are today, but back then it was this.
Was that pre-YouTube?
It's pre. Oh, it wasn't pre-YouTube, but it's before we put it on YouTube. I mean, it came out in 2005, I think. And but
well, YouTube came out in 2005, so it's almost pre-YouTube.
It was before we really thought YouTube was a thing. You know, I know that. You know, and it
was pre-cat videos.
It was pre-cat videos. It was but the funny thing is, it's still the most viewed MacBreak video ever. I think so, when last time when we looked at it, this is a year after it was released, it was in the 400,000 range, you know, of people who had seen it. And the only one that I've done that was more was that one where I did that goofy one with the camera that I made the iPhone video, like the iPhone video when it came out, and I had the little shoulder mount and it didn't even work, but it's silly, but wired connected to it. So it was like 2 million.
But the Road to 1080p talk, Alex goes through very clearly and explains the 420, the 422, the 4, you know, and why, especially DV, and that was really the issue back then, 15 years ago, 16 years ago, why DV keyed so horribly. And it's a brilliant talk, and it could be updated with current stuff, and it's super important. You need to do that.
Okay, all right, yeah, absolutely.
This weekend.
No, not this weekend. This is not the weekend for that. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, can you trigger and adjust Lumakey graphics when controlling an ATEM remotely without the panel or software control app?
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
You'll need the software control app, 100%. You can remotely come into the software control app. You can remotely use the software control app elsewhere.
Well,
but
you could
software control app.
You need it to, but without the panel or well, I mean, technically you could write something that would, you could write some software that would do it, but otherwise, yeah, you need something to tell it to do it. You could theoretically set it up so that it was ready to play, like a playout B, and you would be able to then, when you cut to it, I think now the playout B will support that. Go ahead, Chris.
You know, the downside to doing the luminance key that you're doing is that those controls are quite fiddly. And when it comes to just purely repetition and consistency across a show or a series or even a single piece, it could be really problematic. And that's why my workflow, everything I do and that we do at Slice for our workflows are centered around repeatability. And having a defined alpha channel that's going to control the transparency once and for all, that is it's just a re-render if I have to make a change on something. It's a lot safer.
Next question.
Moving on, this one comes from Christian Ortiz in South Florida. What options or tips do you have for keying USDZ files?
So the best way to do that is to take the USDZ file into Motion and then export it out with an alpha channel out of Motion. So you can do the animation for it. And even, think about how it, like you might do a turntable, that's there. And then you can bring it into Keynote or into other things. And you could you could theoretically play out of motion that way and move things around. I haven't tried that. But the easiest way to do it is to do that, and then you bring it into Keynote, and now you can play it out and Luma key it from there. So that would be a way to, and I've already used that in presentations where I want some 3D object to kind of roll up next to me. I don't have it with me right now, but you can roll up next to me, and that's all done in USDZ. And I predict that eventually someday it'll be in Keynote, just because everything else is going towards USDZ. And at that point, we'll be able to have some fun. I think that if you're able to define the background in preview, you might be able to do it as well, but I haven't tried that. Next question.
Craig McFarlane in Boston, Massachusetts up next. Would it be worth it doing both Chroma and Luma Keying to get a cleaner output?
No, you can't really do. It won't make it any better. It'll just be the worst of the two of them added
You
together.
get a really weird hard edge. Yeah.
Yeah. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back again with, could you easily pre-program a set media pool?
So I need to correct the last answer just real quickly.
Okay.
I said that for graphics, it will create a hard edge. The way that DVMat worked was it pulled a Luma key and it used it to correct the chroma from the 411. So we rebuilt the edge from the chroma information. So it is technically a Luma key. It was a pretty complex Luma key, or not super complex, but it was but that's how DVMat worked. That's how it got good mats from DV, was using that. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, and he's in and it says, could you easily pre-program a set media pool with graphics to be Luma keyed and use shortcuts for an educational use case?
Again, you wouldn't use Luma key in that case. You'd use linear key. Go ahead, Carl.
Does Mix Effect Pro have the ability to fire off those kind of things where you can put in low thirds and stuff?
I think so. Yeah. What were you going to say, Chris?
I was going to say, thanks to our friends at archive.org, I found Road to 1080p.
Is the file there?
Yeah, it hit. Yeah.
I should
Is that
just put it up.
Sal?
It is Sal. Yeah. That was Sal.
Wow, that's great.
He was on. He was, one of the. Yeah. So this is early Alex Telestrator. This is, and it's multiple parts. It's just search. Try your Google, Alex Lindsay, Road to 1080p. I highly recommend.
I don't even know how I did that Telestrator. I don't remember what that was. I think it was some app that you could draw on a screen. I think you could draw
vaguely remember you were doing it, I think, in Photoshop, honestly, because I don't think you were rolling over video. But,
no, I know that the Road to 1080p there was literally no post. That was all done live because we were so I literally, whatever I did, the video was, there was no post, like literally it was a screen record of a QuickTime. So whatever I did on the post it was the thing. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly say, TJ already put a link to the video that video. He found it on their twit.tv. So in the Makana, there's a link to it already.
There we go. Very good. Next question.
Sal was the automator guy. I learned so much automator stuff from him. Great guy. Andre Dolphin Berlin back, and Andre says, could Alex please make this keying video public again?
Is my keying is this video not public? I don't.
It's totally public. It's on archive.org.
Oh, that keying. Oh yeah. And we'll put it. I should just grab all that stuff and put it somewhere. We'll put it up on.
It's not. I will say it's not a great.
Not great quality,
but you can. The
Looks like it was
information is
SDDV.
Yeah. All right, next question.
Moving on, Tony Mobley, Newman, Georgia. Is it okay to mention CWTM will have Dr. Chris Clark on tonight?
That's great. So what time, Tony? Tony, can you hear us?
That is 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You have to figure out the rest. Chris Clark is a very old friend of mine. I think he's known me. I've known him since I was about 5 or 6, but I think he's known me since before I was born. He's a family friend, of my parents. And so anyway, so Chris is amazing, and I think that conversation is going to be a really great conversation. He's built school systems and education, all kinds of stuff over the last 50 years. Incredible resource. So I would highly, highly recommend checking that out. Next question.
Stuart Fairweather has
You muted
Excuse
yourself.
me. Stuart Fairweather has our last general question here. And he says, is it okay to mention that it's really, really hot in Darwin? And I'll invite the cardboards to check out our drag racing stream on the weekend. So Stuart's going racing.
Sounds like fun. Yeah, definitely point it out to us so we can find it. That would be great. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, in the middle of this, I thought that we weren't going to make it. I thought, well, we didn't ask a good question. We didn't have a good subject. I mean, we're not going to get to the end. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, there was a question earlier. I was just wondering if I could show this painter layer real quick in Mimo Live for the telestration. Is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I just downloaded. It's a free add-on. So now you can see I can. Went to eraser. Let me go back to the squiggly pen, so you can see that I can write over the top. And then if I wanted to erase all this stuff really fast, it's here. So I'm just pulling NDI in and then NDI back out. So main camera is NDI feed back out to NDI and into vMix. But you can see that I could change my brush sizes and colors and all that stuff here. So here's the brush size. And then I could change draw using mouse to draw using pen tablet. So at the office, we have in the one button studio room, we have a big Wacom 24-inch Cintiq with the pen. And so this is how we're able to draw over things using Mimo Live.
I like the fact that you can change your color well. So if you needed to make like your corporate colors, that's kind of cool.
I mean, one of the things that's one of the advantages if you want to use chroma keying with what you're doing is that you can have a bunch of different colors that you could theoretically do as opposed to just one. So the way I do it, I think my lines are a little better, but it's a different setup. That's great in Mimo. All right.
I wonder if that was inspired by Alex Lindsay Telestrations.
Who knows?
It's been around for a long time. Okay. I haven't had it installed in mine. You should. Oh, you just put it on yours, Chris?
I think. Yeah.
Or you haven't used it. Yeah, it's free, so you just download it.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Well done by the producers. You pulled it up. We thought we're going to hit the ground early, but we got to the destination. So really well done by and a great job for the panelists, showing a lot of stuff, not making me do it all. So there was a lot of people here that have some experience. We're slowly spreading the telestration love around, and Luma Keying is part of that. Go ahead, Doug.
I know it didn't come up in any question or anything, but in my real life that I have actually chroma keyed out a scoreboard and cropped out just the time and put that time into a score bug. So it didn't come up in a question, but that is a real world thing that happens quite often for me.
Go ahead, Chris.
That's absolutely the way clock and score 30 plus years ago used to be done all the time in basketball. They always had an crappy old camera that they'd point, square it up to the score to the clock, and you'd crop it, squeeze it in the DVE, put it up with the score, and you had to take an ME that had those two things keyed in it. That's absolutely the way it was done before graphics got fancy.
So thanks again to the panelists and for everyone. We'll see you tomorrow. Darren Okada's here. You should really come. That's all I got to say. He's an incredible cinematographer. So we're going to have a great conversation about cinematography. So that'll be tomorrow. And I'll see you then. I'll see you in about 30 seconds in the post show.